Looking back at a big hit this year, Sound of Freedom. It's been billed as the people's movie because of its crowdfunding and word-of-mouth success. It's also the 10th highest grossing movie of 2023, taking in more than $184 million domestically and nearly $250 million worldwide. The New York Times reported it was one of the most successful independent films in history. And joining us to discuss, we had a chance to sit down with Neil and Jeff Harmon, co-founders of Angel Studios. Thank you both so much for sitting down with us.
Thanks for having us, Steve.
Neil, I want to start with you and just get your thoughts when it comes to Hollywood's traditional gatekeeper model, if you will. Tell us about this and kind of the trends that you're seeing and how Angel Studios is going against the grain.
So, traditionally, Hollywood has been, well, the decisions in Hollywood have been decided by very few people. The elite, that they make the decisions as to which stories get told in Hollywood. And Hollywood has assembled the greatest amount of talent around storytelling in the world, and they know how to tell a story well. But they've lost touch because they live in a bubble as to how to choose which story to tell. And Angel Studios, our goal is to flip that, and instead of having a few elite people make the decisions, or just a couple of founders of Angel Studios, we've turned that decision over to the Angel Guild, which is over 100,000 people who watch the films that want to become Angel Studios films and decide whether they reach the standard that needs to be met in order to be launched on Angel.
Jeff, how difficult has this path been for you guys?
This has been this month we're 10-year anniversary, so we've been it's the overnight 10-year success. Yeah, I try to explain to entrepreneurs because we're serial entrepreneurs. We've done a lot of projects before this, advertising agency, CPG goods like tongue cleaners, poopery, purple mattresses, all kinds of projects. And when you're launching a business, it's a big deal when you raise, say, $1 million to start a new business. It hits headlines. If you raise 10 million, it's a big deal. Every single film that we launch into theaters is like launching a 10 million, 50 million, $100 million startup in a 90-day period. And 80% of them fail. So you're assembling hundreds of people, launching an entire startup, and then it either succeeds or burns to the ground in 90 days.
And that's the 80% number is the industry number. Again, yeah. We think that's a sign of the gatekeeper model being broken.
Yeah.
Regard to that model, are you starting to see a shift in kind of the thirst and demand for content in terms of positive messaging?
Absolutely. We are seeing huge support for Angel Studio shows and for other stories that don't come from mainstream Hollywood. His Only Son this year launched to #3 in the box office with a very, very small budget against mega films like Mario Brothers. What were some of the other films that we went up?
Dungeons and Dragons.
John Wick 4, like all these huge films, and then His Only Son got #3. This little teeny film that told the story of Abraham and Isaac. Then Sound of Freedom, in the middle of the summer, had a higher box office domestically than both Mission Impossible and Indiana Jones, and it's telling a true story about child trafficking. And then After Death, which came out just before Halloween, is a documentary, and it's the best-selling documentary since COVID. This is people showing up in huge numbers to support storytelling that they feel resonates with their values.
Yeah, and right now at the holiday season, we're launching a film called The Shift, and it's a sci-fi thriller, a romantic, dystopian romance sci-fi thriller with some faith elements in it. but it's like some people describe it as if Christopher Nolan. It was like Christopher Nolan directed a Hallmark movie. Meaning it's actually thrilling. It's really good, but it also has the romance side in it, and that one's in theaters this Christmas right now.
You guys are still seeing a lot of publicity and success from Sound of Freedom. Tell us about that journey, and why do you think that this film did so well, and did it, exceed your expectations?
Yeah, our highest expectation for Sound of Freedom was about 100 million. That was the top end range. We thought, oh, we can get this to 80 million on our own, and if it gets some legs, probably 100 million ish. And it blew away those expectations. It was this film had legs on its own. This is a credit to the filmmaker. This is a credit to the significance of the story, of the time period we live in, where this is a plague on the world, child sex trafficking. It's a credit to people who watch the film and say, oh, I need to do something about this. So, and it's just excellent filmmaking. Sound of Freedom is the highest by audience standards. So you got the critics and you have the audience. Critics started out 92% positive on Rotten Tomatoes. And then as the controversy hit around it, just kind of fabricated controversy, the media was spinning up. It started dropping because critics were starting to say, oh, this isn't part of my tribe. And so they come in, they didn't review the film, a lot of them, they just reviewed like the controversy around the film. And so it drops down into the 50s over a 3-month period from 92% when it came out the gates before it was controversial to the 50s. The audience, on the other hand, who actually watched the movie, which this is Republicans, Independents, Democrats, all pretty equally watching the film. It was only partisan in the media space. But for the actual viewer, it wasn't a partisan issue. And the audience is the highest rated audience score on Rotten Tomatoes in blockbuster history.
I think it really speaks, Neil, to the power of word of mouth, because there was controversy around it. So I want you to unpack that a little bit for us, a little bit more. What was the controversy actually over?
Well, I think when we took the film to Europe, the Europeans were nervous about the film because we launched this film so quickly from when we signed it to when it came out in the U.S. that we had a pretty big gap before it started releasing internationally. And the Europeans saw the film finally and they said, this is what this was all about? Like, we were expecting something completely different. This is not controversial. America can make a controversy over anything in order to sell tickets. And people started thinking that we had manufactured this to sell tickets. The reality is that the controversy did bring the public eye to this. It became part of the zeitgeist, and everyone was talking about it. It was probably the most talked about film this decade, and it should be, like for these children, it should be. But we didn't manufacture this. We were just trying to get this film out to the world the best that we could, and then the controversy actually just blew it up.
I saw it myself, in the theater, not at a screening, so I have my own sense of how people felt. It was truly gripping. But to your point, there was no political message, objectively speaking, from my vantage point.
And the people who said there was a political message, they would say, oh, it's a subliminal political message. You just have to read behind the lines, and they were trying to turn it into a partisan battle. And it's kind of mind-boggling to watch the extent to which this was turned into a partisan battle. So in the end credits, you see thousands of investors who made this movie possible to come to theaters. They funded it to go to theaters. Thousands of names. Somebody went and took the resources and the time to screenshot all of those names, because that's the only place they were, Then they cross-checked, they digitized them, then cross-checked them across all local databases on criminal records in the United States, and they found one investor who had been accused of being an accomplice to kidnapping during the launch of the film, kidnapping a child. So the headline comes out from this one investor somewhere in Missouri that this investor, the financier, and this person had invested
$50.
Yeah, $50. They had invested $50 into the film, and because it's a crowd investment. There's $50.
It's the Angel Guild.
Yeah,
the Angel Guild backs these shows.
There's $500. There's $50. There's $75. So one person who's invested $50 gets called out as accused of an accomplice to kidnapping. Then the headline morphs into the first headline is the financier of Sound of Freedom gets arrested for child kidnapping.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the headline, and it goes all over.
Well, then it morphs.
Remanufactured, morphed
child
into,
trafficking.
Yeah, that he's a child trafficker. Okay, it turns out this guy, it was just like there was no even charge for kidnapping, so he was charged as an accomplice to a non-crime. It was completely dropped. It's a nothing. There was no story. But they blew it up into the financier, the producer, and then I'm in London at the airport at the premiere, and I'm going through security with my Angel shirt, and a guy says, "Oh," it's one of the TSA guys for London. I don't know what they're called in London, but he says, "You created Sound of Freedom," and I said, "He's like, I got movie tickets for that this weekend.
Wow.
I've pre-ordered them." And I said, "Oh, that's wonderful." And he said, "But are you the producer?" I was like, "No, I'm not the producer. I'm a distributor." And he said, "Oh, that's good, because apparently the producer is a child sex." So he had traveled around the world, this $50 investor, through all these fake news stories, and gotten to the point where an average person in the middle of London is asking me if I'm a child sex trafficker.
The message in the film was just so powerful. To see anybody kind of demonize it really makes you wonder.
Whoever made that headline knew, because they had to go grab all the screenshots of the names on the screen in the theater, digitize them, then go cross-check them. They knew how insignificant this was, but they still published the headlines.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.